afternoon to you all. May I please call the House to order. I would like to welcome you to the African Capacity Building Foundation side event, where we capacity imperatives for the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. My apologies for the few minutes that we have lost. We'll try to move fast enough so that we catch up and we can get the discussions that are promising to be very exciting. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Thomas Mutali, who is going to give us the kickoff presentation to lead our discussions. Dr. Thomas Mutali is the economic foundation. Over to you, Dr. Mutali.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Sorry that I have to be this far. I was hoping that technology would allow me to have remotely my slides, but unfortunately not. So I will have to be here. Welcome to all of us. All protocols observed. I will quickly run through the kickoff presentation for this particular side event, and I will try to be as quick as we want the ratification of the agreement to happen. So, you know, the significance of the trade agreement is pretty obvious. I mean, we know that we would want to, you know, it's going to help in the economic diversification, and you know, as we know at the moment, a lot of the exports that are going out are extractives, but a lot of what is happening between African countries have value addition. So this is going to help promote economic diversification. It will promote the industrialization by improving the value chain across the industries, as well as the inclusive development, because as you know, if you have more value addition, then you have more youth that are involved in terms of job creation, because there will be more value addition, more jobs created. But also with regard to women, most of them are involved in informal cross-trading, and therefore the inclusiveness of this is assured. This agreement and implement it. But now, why are we getting worried that this could fail? We are not being a prophets of doom, but we just want to face the realities that if we don't do certain things, things can derail the whole thing. So the signing is not the end. It needs to be implemented. And so why are we saying there is probability of failing? There is a history to this. In the research work that we did at the African Capacity Building Foundation, the digest of the Organization of African Unity and African Union, we found out that, you know, since 1963, about 42 treaties and agreements were signed, but only 25 had been ratified by 2013. A more interesting finding, which I should give credit to Professor Jerome here, you know, when we're digging into the AU records, we see that from 2002 to 2018, 51 treaties and agreements have been signed, but only 31 of them have been ratified. And actually 19 of them took an average of 5 years to ratify. So you see, we're talking about history here, that we are worried that chances are we could face a problem as well. So we need to bear this at the back of the mind. But what is critical though is the capacity dimension, because both in terms of the ratification and the implementation, we should be looking at what capacities are required. And this could be the missing link. And this is why we've had to have this particular side event to look at at what capacities then are we talking about. In general terms, Africa, we find that the capacity becomes so challenging, especially with regard to implementation. A number of the countries, over 75% of the countries, have capacity to design policies and strategies, but the implementation capacity is the one that lacks. So this this is also a reflection that we have an agreement here, which is very good and sound, but then we should be looking at the capacities to ratify it and implement it. But more specifically, coming to the trade elements, we have a few other issues that we are looking at in terms of the ability of the countries, especially to negotiate trade deals amongst, the African countries in this case, because we're talking of intra-African trade. Even the low human and institutional capacity at the REX level, you and I know that the REX are really the building blocks in terms of facilitating for trade at the regional level. And the same with the technical skills that will be required for the value addition, so that the kind of trading that is taking place across the African countries have value added to them. We don't have those technical skills at the moment. Also, the huge and soft hard infrastructure, which is also hugely lacking. Now, how do we then go ahead in terms of building this capacity? Two elements in the immediate and then medium to long term. Immediately, there's need for supporting the rapid ratification of the agreement. And you know that already about 47 countries have signed this, the Kigali Declaration, and yet only 2 so far have ratified it. We need to go a step further in sensitizing stakeholders in terms of what needs to happen. And then here on the implementation roadmap, countries also need to submit their schedules of concession for trade. Immediately, these are the immediate things that we need to look at in terms of helping countries do. But if we're moving forward, there are quite a few areas which I'll quickly run through. We need to support the countries then in terms of domesticating and developing national strategies, because this has to go at the national level. We also have to look at countries, supporting them in implementing what we call the action plan for boosting intra-Africa trade, which will help them to build the necessary productive capacities, and then support countries with the Africa Mining Vision, so that we can help in making sure that there is beneficiation and all that, so that trade goes into more value addition. Developing the critical technical skills. Just to put this in context, Africa, currently in the work that we did for the African Union Commission in analyzing the capacity needs for Agenda 2063, we found that the technical needs in terms of engineers, for example, the continent will need about 4.3, a gap that is there, which means that every year we should be producing about 500,000 engineers to fill up that gap. So already that's an area that would require a lot of attention if we are to make this a reality, the trade agreement. Infrastructure is another key element that we have to think about. And then again, the mindset issue, which is the need to develop the soft capacities. It is very important that, especially for our leaders, for them to be able to adopt this, that they have the right mindset to appreciate that this is for the good of the continent and their people. So this is the end of it. We will, I'll end at the questions that, I would have to define what this panel, therefore, that we have would have to be thinking through, as well as those of us that are here, in terms of what exactly is the kind of capacities that we need to build. We have the privilege here of having the commissioner, the commissioner for trade. We also have the executive secretary from ACBF. We need to hear what these institutions would have to be putting in place in the immediate and long term to do that, plus all the other high-level panels that are here. With that, thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Ntali, for such an elaborate presentation. So, colleagues, here we are. I think he has really set the tone. The key issues that we want to discuss is what are the capacity requirements for the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area to work? Do we have the capacities? If not, what does it take for us to reinforce these capacities without also stalling progress on the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area? Joining me on this panel, I've got seasoned experts who are going to help us untackle these issues. On my left, I've got Professor Jerome. He's an international consultant who has got vast experience in different development economic issues, with so much experience in regional integration. We are also honored to have His Excellency, Mr. Albert Muchanga. He's the Commissioner for Trade and Industry. Next to him is the Executive Secretary for the African Capacity Building Foundation, Professor Emmanuel Nadozi. I would also want to acknowledge Dr. Mustafa Jalab. He's the head for training and research at the Economic Commission for Africa, IDEP. We also have His Excellency, the Councillor for the Cabinet for the Ministry of Economic Planning with the Republic of DRC, with the Democratic Republic, with DRC, Professor Bahat Maburuki. May I also acknowledge, representing our private sector, Mr. Semeden Negatu. He's the Global Chairman of Fairfax Africa Funds. We are also honored to have a youth ambassador in our presence, that Mr. Samson Kabede. He's with the National Youth Council. I'd like to welcome our panelists to this esteemed event. And without wasting much time, I'll start off with Professor Jerome. Maybe as we unpack the presentation that we have had, would you want to share with us what you think are the critical capacities that REX really needs to be able to efficiently and effectively implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? And in your own opinion, what immediate action plan should key development partners, especially ACBF as the specialized agency for capacity development for the AU, what action plan do you think they should develop to equip the REX with the requisite capacities for successful implementation? Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Patience. I don't know why you are starting with me. When the commissioner is here, if you want to use me as guinea pig, then I will try. Like, how many minutes?
5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. I do think sincerely that the Continental Free Trade Agreement is a game changer for the continent if properly implemented, especially against the background of the growing tension by major trading partners. I mean, when you listen to America, China, everybody over 2 years about trade wars over steel and what have you. The slow pace of global talks, whether you go back to Buenos Aires, what has been happening with WTO, or the bilateral agreement which we have, it is an opportunity for Africa to redress the vulnerabilities. Having said this, looking at the Continental Free Trade Agreement, one point that is often not made is that it is not a new agreement per se. It is part of implementing the Abuja Treaty. That is what I think many countries don't know and need to be reminded, those who are against it. Looking at from the REC perspective, I mean, going back to the Abuja Treaty, it did envisage certain rules for REX, cutting across 6 stages. A very useful guide for all of us would be Area 8. It's very, very comprehensive. It's not what we needed. Looking at what REX have done at the stages where they are at that stage, not all of them have been able to fulfill. I mean, apart from free trade, where particularly all of them have done, not all of them have been able to move beyond the level 1, going towards level 6. So this Continental Free Trade Agreement will be able to fast-track that process in Africa if orderly implemented. But having said that, I mean, I do have some worries that some big countries like South Africa and Nigeria, who should be championing this, they are yet to sign. Because Africans are normally very good at signing documents. After signing, they don't ratify, like we were told now. Invariably, in terms of what should we expect from REX, in the past 5 years or so, I've been involved with helping ACBF to do a mapping of the capacity of REX. So when I talk, I'm talking like an insider. What I can tell you is that the 8 recognized REX, of these 8, you find that only 2 or 3 of them have some good capacity in the area of trade. But coming specifically to what they expected to do, the AFTA documents itself gave them 4 specific rules. The first one is that state parties that are members of REX that have attained higher levels, that is a part of the Abuja Treaty, they will maintain such levels. The second one is that they have to contribute to the institutional coordination implementation at the regional level of this agreement. And also, they play a part in an advisory capacity through their respective seats on AFTA committee of senior trade officials. I mean, REX are expected to play that role. These are from the document, not me mapping. In the long run, I mean, as the level of integration deepens, they expect that the trade-related aspects, roles of REX, will collapse and be transferred to this after, so that everything will be consolidated. And finally, there is also the consolidation of the tripartite, because we're having the tripartite free trade agreement already among 3 RECs, as well as other RECs into a continental free trade area. This is what is envisaged by the documents. But looking at this after the signing ceremony where 44 countries signed and how we move forward, I've broken down the rules of RECs to maybe 3 or 4 main areas. The first one is in the area of signing stroke ratification. 44 countries have signed, and usually, given the fact that Africa, they are normally very good at signing, but the ratification is always a more difficult process, because this is supposed to pass through the country parliaments. I think the RECs have a major role there in terms of advocacy and publicity. Many of the meetings we'll be holding, I think we are speaking to the converted, like here now. I mean, these are people who are already converted to the program. We need to find a way of reaching the private sector. Governments don't trade. It's the private sector who eventually, I know they'll be involved, but they have to be much more involved systematically in this agreement. So also, the civil society, women, these are the real people who integration is going to impact on. I mean, the trade talks, they've done a fantastic job, given the fact that they started meeting just 2016 here, and an agreement is already this year. And we're also lucky that we have a chair who is very purposive at the African Union this time, President of President Kagame. So we have many things going for us. So the advocacy and publicity is very, very important. But there are also some negatives. Take ECOWAS, for example. You see, ECOWAS is having some challenges now with the free movement, in as much as they led this, because of the herdsmen killing. People are beginning to suspect that it's because of this free movement of people that the killings are taking place. So
Thank you, Prof. I'll have to just pause you there.
Okay.
You raised quite interesting issues, and I'd like to immediately request our youth representative. You've talked about various people that you think are very important for advocacy and all that, and I believe the youth are also very important in this framework. I want to get a sense from you, Mr. Kadebe. Do youth really appreciate and understand this whole continental free trade area agreement? And what are the potential benefits of the implementation of this agreement to the youth?
Okay, thank you very much. I can say the African continental free trade area is a big opportunity for the youth. As it's free for all African youth to move freely from one country to another of their choice. The other one, and the first and foremost, the biggest opportunity is the creation of jobs, which will boost employment opportunities, and technology and knowledge transfer from one country to another country between the youth. And I can say the youth really appreciate, starting from an African Union passport. It was a very fantastic idea. We loved it, and actually we were discussing this in many panels and events like this. And now the continental free trade area will give a broader opportunity for the young people to move and work in the continent freely. It's also going to help the young generation to have a continental market access, which is going to pave a way for large and massive production. So I think it's going to help young innovators to find a large market so that they can bring out what they have to the continent. The other one I can say for the youth, that the free trade area will create more and well-paid jobs in the continent, reducing migration, illegal migration, and reducing brain drain. So as we have have knowledge and technology transfer. We are like between neighboring countries, between African countries, all the African countries. It's going to help the youth to help out each other. For example, Uganda and Kenya have much better incubation centers, like tech hubs than our country. So when we have this kind of free trade areas, we are going to share knowledge and transfer of technology from the neighboring countries. So it's going to be a big opportunity for the youth, and I can generalize the biggest winners and beneficiaries of the African continental free trade area are the youth as well. Thank you.
So much. Thank you so much. I think when I listen to what you're saying, it becomes very clear that the youth are important, but they also don't operate in a vacuum. They are operating within a bigger private sector. And basically when I look at this whole agreement, the private sector is at the center of it all. We are putting up the agreement, but the immediate primary beneficiaries and implementers of it becomes the private sector. I'm coming over to you, Mr. Negato. To what extent and how does the private sector welcome this framework? And in your own opinion, what do you think would be the key message that the African private sector would want to send to governments at this point in time?
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I'll be brief and to the point. By way of introduction, I run an American private equity firm that invests exclusively in Africa. So for us, this kind of discussions are practical, everyday thing that we follow. To answer your question, I use an example because we're in the business world. I was telling Dr. Thomas Muntali, right, earlier. My team and I, for example, have worked on virtually every airline deal in Africa over the last 10 years. One of the things that puzzled us every time we do a deal, whether it's in Malawi or in Togo or wherever, is how fragmented these markets are, how entrenched the vested interests are to see these things not integrated. So I'll give you a very good example. The result of what happens if you're not integrated from a practical business point of view. Today, 80% of air travel in Africa is done by non-African carriers. 80%. British Airways, Air France, whatever. In fact, if you take out Ethiopian Airlines and KQ and South African Airways from the mix, it's almost 99% is done by non-African carriers. For the simple reason that every single time you want to fly from one African country to another as an African carrier, you have to have what's called these bilateral air service agreements for all 54 countries. We don't have that in Europe. So from a practical point of view, I think these kinds of initiatives, as we'll say, if they can become reality beyond just, the good factor that we have today, I think will be very much supported by the private sector. But there are challenges. And I'll tell you how we invest, and this leads into the discussion here. We look at countries where we can build or establish, for example, manufacturing facilities that can export their products to neighboring countries who do not have barriers to free trade. For the simple fact that virtually all African countries have GDPs that are very, very, very small by any stretch of the imagination. So you can't be building. So the idea will be then if you aggregate the region or the countries, then they become much more attractive, whether it's an American investment firm like us, or the Asians, or the Europeans. Today, I think there's only like 3 countries in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, whose GDP is over $100 billion, which is nothing. But if we aggregate them, then you create bulk. So I think the advantage of these kinds of initiatives in practical terms is to help attract investors on a regional basis. And one of the questions that I think you sent me was, what does the African private sector think? Well, the African private sector is very big, it's very wide, so I'd be hesitant to answer it in such a broad term. But the answer will be, depends on which country and which sector. The bigger countries, much more industrialized, who are able to take advantage of this thing immediately will be very happy about these things. The small countries will be reluctant. That means you need to build confidence that the smaller ones will not be marginalized at the cost of the bigger ones. And the thoughts, I mean, I think Nigeria and South Africa was mentioned as not being signatories to this thing. I think it's because they're local, and certainly in the case of Nigeria, I know, the private sector there was very vocal about this thing. So that means you need to sell it to the Nigerian private sector. You need to sell it to all these private sectors around these. So that the first thing I think as a private sector needs to be engaged, because the fear factor is there. If you ask me, I'm as an Ethiopian, 10 years ago, if Ethiopia should have signed up to this thing, I would have said no. But Ethiopia is building industrial parks that sells them. And I bought the suit in America made in an industrial park. So today we can sell it to Kenya, to other countries. So, you know, for countries like us, maybe this is a big plus. But the others may not see it. And the private sector is actually the ones who are leading the thought process in these countries. So just keep this in mind as we have discussion. But the bottom line is, it's good to have this. I think it's a big plus, at least conceptually, but it needs a lot of work to make a lot of stakeholders happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, the expectations are very high. We have heard from the RECs, we have heard from the youth and the private sector. Professor Maburuki, this whole framework, we have done a bit of progress in terms of its signing, but if countries do not ratify, we are not going to implement. We want to tap into your experience with working with governments. What, in your own opinion, what measures do you think governments should put in place in order to fast-track the ratification of the Continental Free Trade Area, which is a key step to its implementation? Over to you, Prof.
Excuse me, I'll try to speak in English, but I think that since I'm a francophone by origin, I'll move to learn English. C'est très important comme enseignant. J'enseigne le cours d'intégration régionale au niveau des universités. C'est un cours qu'on appelle ORSA, Organisation sous-régionale et régionale africaine. En première licence d'économie, dans les différentes options. Le cours
at undergraduate level. So when I teach the steps of regional integration, I say that there are 6 steps. These are the 6 steps that the European Union respected meticulously to reach where they are now. I think it's the best model for regional integration. Now, to see how countries can ratify these models, first we have to address why are they not ratifying. We have to diagnose first. So the 10 countries that ratified it, we have to ask why, and why others are not ratifying. Now, if you look at the 2 countries like Ghana and Kenya who have ratified this CFTA, it's because they have the competitive advantage or comparative advantage. People are talking about competitive advantage, or what they can sell on the market and what they can gain in terms of imports and exports, the exchanges. If you take Kenya, for example, they belong to the Eastern Africa community. It's the only country in the East Africa community with the biggest economy, so they are imposing themselves into other countries like Rwanda, Tanzania, Burundi, and so on. And so, in such a way, they have potentials to export to other countries of the sub-region, to the contrary of others. Let me give you the example of Ghana. Ghana, if it ratified this, it's because if you follow the president of Ghana, he said that he doesn't need anymore the World Bank, the IMF, the European Union, because its economic growth is sufficient enough to be autonomous and to have investment capacity. So he doesn't require the support of others. So Ghana has also a lot to sell for neighboring countries. It's just to say that the 2 countries are in a favorable position to ratify because they have the competitive and comparative advantage. So that is why they have ratified it very quickly. their economies have grown very quickly. Let's take the case of DRC. Minister Shokitundu, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, signed in Kigali. And ratification may not happen very quickly. So, before answering the question how to put in place ratification measures, we have to address the first questions first. If you look at my CV, I worked for 27 years in international organizations. DRC is the only country in Africa that has 9 neighboring countries with which we have direct borders. DRC exports nothing towards these 9 neighboring countries. If I tell you this, you may not believe me, but that's the reality. But we import everything from neighboring countries. Just to tell you that the ratification of DRC would benefit to whom? If DRC ratifies now, and the other 21 countries also ratify, it's the end. And the agreement would be operational. So what would we gain from that? 80% of our exports, of our revenues, 80% of our revenues come from the exports of extractive industries, but we do not export these to our neighboring countries, not towards African countries. China is the biggest importer of these extractive materials, minerals. So in terms of exchange, there is a bigger role to play inter-countries at regional level. So like in the SADC region, for example, East African community between themselves, and then we can see how we can exchange with the other RECs. So countries will ask what would they gain if they ratify. At a political level or a policy level, there are conflicts in our area, for example. Rwanda against DRC, Burundi against the rest of the world, Uganda against DRC. We have a tension between countries. There are even tensions between different heads of states. The tension between heads of states against one head of state, internal conflicts even within neighboring populations. This is at political level. Every time you hear there were some conflicts here and there, and people are saying, for example, Congolese soldiers violated or crossed the border of Rwanda. Even in the small REC like Rwanda, Burundi, and DRC, the free movement of goods and people does not exist. I come from Goma, east of DRC, but a mother with a child and wanting to sell bananas. The customs officers will not let her cross the border. That customs officer will harass her to get some corruption. So we can further elaborate during our discussions, of course. Thank you for your attention.
which foresees the reduction of tariffs, of intra-rex tariffs, but also on non-measures. And I think it's a critical element, and we should also try to link this CFTA agreement with also the trade that many African countries have ratified, which also make the positive and likely effect of the CFTA even more important. So I think we should have a broader impact so that to conceptualize also the CFTA within what is happening at the global level. So yes, indeed, we ACBF and ECA and EDEP, and this MOU really try to provide technical assistance, training and capacity building for a large scale of stakeholders. We are talking here about national countries, we are talking here about regional economic communities, and of course also we try to work as much as possible with the African Union Commission through what we call the RCM, the coordination mechanism between the support provided by UN and also other organizations to the African Union. As far as the MOU between ACBF and ECA EDEP is concerned, what we want to achieve is really to target, officials working at the ministry. I'll just give you an illustration. It was mentioned by the presentation of our colleague here that there is a critical technical skills requirement in mass every year, and we need at least to have 500,000 engineers trained every year. Which is very, very important. So as far as we are concerned with this MOU, what we try to do is really to design specific courses to make sure that countries could benefit from the CFTA. And here, when we talk about trade, we are also talking about other issues. We are talking about agriculture. 70% of population in Africa are working in the agri-sector. We are talking about industrialization. Let's keep in mind that here, and I recognize the presence of David Locke, who is the coordinator of the African Trade Policy Center and was the coordinator of this very important publication on Area 8. And here, what is important also to mention is the role of industrial policy. And the key objective also of the CFTA is to make sure that here trade is a key element for industrialization. So we are designing here very specific courses for officials working on trade issues, and here we are designing various courses on data analysis, on trade and gender, on industrialization, and we want also to work with RECs, with regional economic communities. And here you mentioned the number of RECs. We are working with all the RECs in Africa, and I think it's very important also to have this in mind. And we were talking about also ratification. I think that if we want this agreement to be understood, we need also to explain it. And here, when we talk about ratification, we need to target parliamentarians. So there is also a strong need also to make sure that there is a training, and also a specific session geared towards parliamentarians and making sure that there is here the understanding that this agreement is not an end in itself. What we need to achieve is to raise also supply side constraints, to have a coherence among sectoral policies, and also to reach diversification and export diversification. So probably I was a little bit too long, but if there's also other question, I will try to answer to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, it was very, Your Excellency, that I had to let everyone else speak. All the people that have spoken so
is a constitutional requirement. Before the head of state and government signs the agreement, all the documents have to be finalized. So when we signed in Kigali, we had the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area and 3 protocols: a protocol on trade in goods, on trade in services, and the protocol on dispute settlement. And the 3 protocols have a number of annexes, about 11 altogether. And for the past 2 weeks, our legal experts have been legally scrubbing those documents, and they'll continue towards the end of May in Senegal, and before 8th June, the Specialized Technical Committee of Ministers of Legal Affairs and Justice will look at these legally scrubbed documents, and if they are satisfied, then they'll take them to the summit as it adopts. So some of the countries been adopted by the summit to take to their parliaments, and the president will sign. So that's all they are waiting. Others still need to reach out to the national stakeholders, the labor movement, the private sector, the civil society, academia, and the other stakeholders. And they need the town between Kigali and the Mauritania summit, which is coming up in July, to finalize those stakeholder consultations. And they involve traveling across the countries, the national territories. It takes some time. And we provided for that when we were negotiating the documents. And they assured us that they will be able to sign. So we are hopeful that of the 11 countries that did not sign, they are going to sign by the time we go to Kigali. We have a very strong advocacy mechanism to ensure that we reach out to everybody. At the top, we have got what we call the champion or the leader of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the president of Niger. And he has been traveling across Africa talking to the leaders that did not sign. And he has also been complimented by the chairperson of the African Union Commission, who has been talking. And all the commissioners have been assigned that when they go to all the national capitals, they should have engagements with the governments and also stakeholders, or advocating for ratification and signature of the African Continental Free Trade Area. On above, we have what we call the private sector and public sector advocates. We are in the process of appointing those, and they'll be traveling to many parts of Africa to advocate for the signing or signature of the legal instruments establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. And for West Africa, I think my senior trade advisor is here. He will give us the dates. I think before the end of May, we shall I'll join a group called the Afro Champions, which is a private sector initiative to advocate for signing and ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area. I'll be with them in West Africa for about 4 or 5 days. I think he has the details of the dates when we are going to be there. And that brings in the question of, and maybe this is where I start answering some of the issues. That brings in the question of private sector involvement. We are very, very much involved with the private sector. In fact, a day before signature, we had a session called the African Continental Free Trade Area Business Forum. It was attended by about 500 business people from Africa, and some of them came from outside Africa. And they found it a very useful platform for engaging with the heads of state and government, for engaging with the ministers, and also for engaging in business-to-business networking among themselves, such that they requested that we should institutionalize it, and the summit institutionalized it. And as an indication of their goodwill, the
Afro Champions Club decided to pledge $1 million to promote advocates for the signature and ratification of the instruments. The other question is the involvement of the youth. We are working with the International Trade Center in Geneva to have an African Continental Free Trade Area Youth Forum in September in Zambia during this year, so that we also ensure that they benefit from the business forum that we had. The other question which came up was one of fragmentation and with respect to the air transport market. In January this year, the heads of state and government adopted the single African air transport market, which is going to fully liberalize air transport across Africa. And that is going to do away with the bilateral air transport agreements. So we are creating a huge market out of that process. Then again, back to the private sector. Want to ensure that the African private sector...
Your Excellency, I'm giving you a minute to round off.
Okay, because I got a number of issues there, but anyway, the other issue which, which is of interest to the private sector, that we're in the process of coming up with a business guide to the African Continental Free Trade Area. We hope to ensure that it comes out by December this year. And when it comes out, the whole of next year and 2020, we are going to roll it out to the private sector across Africa so that they appreciate it and really make use of it. And since I'm very little time, I think I've got a very special request when it comes to capacity building, and this is that we would like the African Capacity Building Foundation to work with us in mainstreaming informal cross-border trade, because if we do that, we are going to unlock about $60 billion per annum, which is the value of that trade, and it will immediately increase the level of intra-African trade. So this is a quick win. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I almost asked you, Professor Nadozi, to be the first one to speak, but I thought, no, wait a minute. We want to what exactly is on the ground. You have heard them speak. You have also heard the AUC pronounce what exactly they are doing. But also ACBF has been designated by the AU itself for you to handle capacity development issues that are necessary for the effective implementation of Agenda 2063. And you know that the Continental Free Trade Area is one of the major projects or cornerstones of our Agenda 2063. So if you may share with us, hearing all the capacity issues that have been raised in this forum, what are the immediate actions that ACBF is doing or has actually planned out to put in place to support the AUC, the REX, and African countries to ensure that this agreement takes off?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'm extremely happy, and I'm very grateful to all the people who are showed up here today, in particular the Commissioner, Honorable Commissioner, who, despite his extremely busy schedule, honored us with his presence, and the other panelists who are here. We are very grateful for your participation and for your presence here today. Before I answer your question, Madam Moderator, let me assure the Commissioner that the request that you have made has been well received. Normally, I would be diplomatic to say it is under consideration, but given the seriousness and the impact of this Continental Free Trade Area, I can say right now that you can consider that we have given our go-ahead and that we'll work with you on this one. Please, you can applaud if you want. Now, let me make 3 quick points, and then I will answer the question. The first point is, let us not make any mistake about it, and this is not because I work in a capacity building organization. It is that capacity is central to the actualization, the implementation, and the maximization of the benefits of the Continental Free Trade Area. And I think the presentation gave some illustration of that. But if you look over time, you would see that in the continent, it is not an issue of having good strategies or good development plans, and it's not even an issue of having agreements or decisions or protocols, but those protocols and agreements and fantastic plans translating into real development outcomes on the ground is really where we are lacking. And the key issue is lack of implementation. And the problem is implementation. But why are we not implementing? Of course, somebody will say maybe lack of political will, maybe lack of resources. But even rich countries that are awash with resources are not implementing. Even when the head of state has a lot of political will, they are still not implementing. So we have really done some serious work on this issue to show the centrality of capacity in this area. And when I say capacity, what am I talking about? Really, of course, the one that everybody knows about, men and women with skills, who have expertise in various areas, who can do things, to achieve certain results. But the most important one, as far as I'm concerned, well, second to the most important, is the institutional capacity. The institutions either are non-existent or they are weak. And thirdly, which is extremely probably the most important one, are what we have categorized as the soft capacities, ranging from change in mindset that needs to happen across the board because of this lack of belief in Africa's capacity to develop itself, or thinking people will have to come from outside, to the issue of leadership across the board. So the 3 points I'm going to make is, number one, I've made it, which is the centrality of capacity development overall. And we need to pay attention to it right from the get-go, not as an afterthought. We have to start to deal with it right from now. The second point I want to make is, what are the key dimensions here? Because if you have so many challenges, you probably need to prioritize and pay attention to the most binding constraints so that they will have some larger impact. For me, for this CFTA to work, three things have to happen. You need three things. Number one for me is, at the national level in particular, you need a continental free trade area strategy. That has to happen, whether you have signed or you have not signed or you have ratified, because believe me, I'm with the Commissioner on this. Almost every African country is going to sign this. They've never been shy in signing things, so don't think about that. They will sign it. But of course, the ratification is a different story. So the strategy is very important. The second thing, of course, is the institutional mechanism or institutional framework for the implementation of that. And the third thing, which I believe is very important, is what I call the private sector that will eventually drive it. In other words, you'd have to have a vibrant private sector. If it's already there, you have to mobilize them. If it's not there, this is a time that everybody has to wake up and begin to pay attention to the development of Africa's private sector. So that's there. Now, but for this thing to really happen, you need certain CFTA-specific capacities and non-CFTA capacities as well, or complementary capacities that will make it happen. So the first one is leadership. I've mentioned it, and this is visionary, a driven leadership, proactive, result-oriented, and accountable. If you look at the countries that are doing well, you look at the leader and you see why it is happening. But it's not only the head of state, it's also leadership in every other level. The second one is the institutions and the good governance, and I've discussed this before. Whether they're institutions to maintain political stability and manage, and regulate economic activities, or the ones that will help to uphold the rule of law and enforce property rights, and the ones that will provide social insurance. Because believe it or not, there are going to be winners and losers, inter-country winners and losers, but intra-country winners and losers, especially women and the poor. So we need to make sure that we think ahead of the time how to mitigate these losses or these populations that will be the losers. Since time is of essence, I'll try to round this up quickly. The second thing, aside from the leadership and institutions, is human capital.
And we need to rebuild the state capacity, because this has been one thing that has been hampering Africa's development, or the underperformance that you see happening everywhere, which means we have to develop competent and effective bureaucracy and public administration. This is an area where CBF has been paying serious attention, because if you go to many countries, you see that those bureaucratic mechanisms that were strong before, thanks to certain things that happened at some point in the 70s and 80s, they became weak. But also we need to develop the critical skills and professionals needed for CFTA. So these are the CFTA capacity, specific capacities, and I don't have time to list all of them here. But last but not the least, in the human capital dimension, are the critical technical skills which have been talked about here. The gap is so huge and so overwhelming. And if you look at what the universities are doing and the other institutions of higher learning, many of them are not responding to the needs of society, so governments keep investing in unemployment. Now, last point is infrastructure, obviously, but I won't mention that. We have been, as ACBF, working very hard to assist countries in many ways. We already have trainings that are really geared to really help in building some expertise in these areas, working together with some master's program in regional integration with African Virtual University. We have also been working with our partners ECA and NEPAD and everybody else to support the RECs so that they can do their work. And also the critical technical skills. Currently we have a program in Ouagadougou, in Abuja, and in Arusha, channeling, focusing on this, especially promoting women in science and technology and innovation. So that, and these are people who, when we design these processes, we are mindful of, the issue of brain drain. So we design upfront a strategy for capacity retention and capacity utilization, because there's no point for us to invest all this amount of money only to lose these skills. Anyway, I have so much more to say, because this is an area that I'm very passionate about, but I cannot dominate the meeting that I called. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Well, I think the discussions led by our panelists have been so exciting, but our audience are the most important. I'd like to give this time to you to share your comments, your experiences, and your questions, because I know that we, as Africans, we are always considerate of each other. I will request that for every comment, questions I know they'll be very brief, but for the comments, let's try to be brief enough, not go beyond half a minute, so that we allow everyone to share what they think would really contribute to this discussion. So to you, any comments, questions? So maybe we'll take a round. If there are questions, maybe let's just take all the questions, and then quickly, if they're directed to and then our panelists will handle all those that are directed to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mine is maybe a comment plus. Yes, my name is Asin Nashikaku. I'm actually a commercial counselor from the Embassy of Namibia. Well, I really just wanted to make a comment. The very first comment is about the implementation of the of the Continental Free Trade Area. First and foremost, at the presentation of this particular document in Kigali, we've seen 80% of the member states signing, so we should not be able to underestimate that. Secondly, within 1.5 months, we have already seen, I could say, 3 countries already ratifying, not even 2, I think it's 3. Now, thirdly, even if all the member states have ratified right now today, you will not be able to see the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area. There are a number of issues that should be able to operationalize the Continental Free Trade Area. We should understand that. Now, the second last comment that I wanted to make is just to say that the intra-African trade, the low intra-African trade, really, do we really think that it is because of the inefficiency within Africa? Is it really efficient to trade with somebody who's far away from you? Look about infrastructure, look about infrastructure development in Africa. They should be able to consider for you to be able to make sure that Continental Free Trade Area is supposed to work. Lastly, the question. Okay, thank you.
The moment I do this, I'm saying a little. Can I take another comment or question? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Mesela Njapo from the Railroad Association. We are a member organization, and our objectives are twofold: to promote and protect the interests of the rail industry. So we come from a private sector view to say that we are here as private sector for the implementation and the contribution in terms of policy development. We're here to assist. And we talk about youth, we talk about women. Some of the policies that we bring about have a huge impact on the people on the ground. I know of a man, an African man, that has lost his dignity because of the lack of implementation of policies. So we need to give back dignity to the African man. We need to protect women by implementing those policies, because if you don't implement them, then an agenda will remain just that. So from that point of view, even the youth, we talk about the Industry 4.0. Who's going to carry Africa through that? If we're not empowering our youth, if we're not making decisions fast enough to make sure that we realize our goals. So as private sector, we're saying we are here. Thank you.
Any more questions, comments? Implementation is a definition of your dignity. Yes, sir.
John, London newspaper. I'm just curious what the panelists think. The theme of the ministerial conference is trying to convince finance ministers that actually it's in their interest to maybe take a short-term hit for the long-term gain. I'd be curious to have the panelists' comments on this, please, and how do you think, as to say, everyone here who's sort of converted can convince the finance ministers who might be concerned that the short-term gain, the short-term losses that aren't justified, even in the interest of long-term gain. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll ask the lady over there.
Yes, thank you. I'll just like to ask two questions to the Commissioner regarding the implementation timeline for the single air market, as well as the passport, the African Union passport, especially the procedure for the passport to trickle down to the lowest level. Thank you.
Well, I think there were two questions from the last speakers, one for the Commissioner and the other one. So I would suggest that maybe we just respond to those ones, and then maybe as you, Commissioner, as you respond, you also put on your last words. And then for the last one that the gentleman made, whoever is going to take it up, you then also put your last words, and then the panelists do the same, so that we stick on our schedule. Otherwise, we'll be chased out of here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The launch of the single African air transport market started the process of its implementation. So far, there are 34 countries which have signed. We are reaching out to the others to come on board. And for full implementation, and this is not my area, it's my colleague involved in infrastructure, really there are certainly steps that needed to be taken at the national level with respect to capacity development, as well as development of institutional structures to ensure that all what constitutes a single African air transport market comes into place. So I think that's all I can say. The African passport is work in progress. The free movement of people protocol has been signed. It requires a minimum of 15 ratifications, unlike the one on trade, which is 22. And at the level of the business people, when the process of identifying Africans who are investing in a number of countries, and they'll be given with the African passports. If I can contribute to the issue on from the financial terms, it's a very good question. I think in the few days that we'll be meeting the ministers, we'll try to convince them that the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area will create fiscal space via other means of raising revenue, such as value-added tax. We hope they'll buy that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. I'll ask Professor Jerome, what would be your last final word in less than 30 seconds?
That this is a very crucial agreement. I thought David Luke was going to say something. I don't think we address the issues of my brother from DRC, because I think they are very, very germane, and from the country point of view. Because if you look at the simulations, DRC is one of those countries that is going to have revenue losses of more than 20%. There are a few countries like that. And this should give us wide specificity in terms of negotiation, because it's always very difficult. We need a special differentiated treatment as well as a variable geometry. I mean, these are things we can impose. Looking at the 4 billion versus the long run, and someone who works closely with the heads of states, I can tell you there are two things that you use to get their attention: money and votes. And this time you want to take money away from them. So you have to be very cautious. They may have ratified, but the agreement will never be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll move to Professor Nedjasi. Any final words? He should be the last. He should be the last. Oh, okay. I'll move to you, Dr. Jalab.
Merci beaucoup. Si vous question est de quelques mots résumés sur la zone de libre-échange continentale.
The CRT and technical assistance, I would say two things, and this boils down to three things. The first thing is the technical dimension of the modalities of tariffs. This is a point that has not been underscored here, together with the question that was raised on the short-term hit and long-term gain, the issue of modalities, goods to be excluded is an important thing to address the adjustment costs. So the technical dimension needs technical assistance both at the African Union and also at the continent region. This is important for the implementation to be operational. Secondly, is training. I think that training the people who will be in charge of implementation and from this is crucial. Implementation of the agreement, which means technical experts who are able to track agreement. So training is something that is very important, and ACP can come in handy in that. Thirdly, we should not get this, and I'll conclude, is that this is a means. This is a means to bolster regional integration and to ensure that intra-regional trade is a growth factor which is tied into 2030 and 2063 agenda. Thank you. I conclude.
Thank you. Professor Mabruki.
Merci. S'il faut que je commence, c'est là où...
Thank you. I'm going to start where he stopped. For the agenda 2023 to be implemented, first of all, you need the political will of our leaders. The chairman talked about it. You're talking about leadership at the heads of states level. So this will ensure that they understand one another, and also the decisions that will be made in forums like this. Because after this forum, there will be a statement made by the different ministers, and these statements will be taken to the heads of states and governments. And if these declarations actually open their eyes, the heads of state should see what's in it for them. They also need to see their political stakes. They're here for some time, but then they leave. There are people who stayed for long in power, but that, for me, is the consideration.
I'll move to you, Mr. Ligatu.
So a couple of things from the private sector, from an investor perspective. One is, and we see this every day in the deals that we do where we have to deal with the public sector, we need to make sure that when we talk about capacity building, public sector is seen as a noble profession, well rewarded, well regarded, so that every time an investor comes to a country or it has to do with a ministry or a licensing agency, the best and the brightest have been poached and gone somewhere else, and we start from scratch. That discourages investors. So we need to find a way for the capacity building from that perspective. I mean, this is how the Asians developed. The Singaporeans, I think, have given us an excellent example how you can build a very rewarding public sector profession as a career. Okay? The second point I want to make, and this is something near and dear to my heart, and I've talked about this, there are millions of Africans in the diaspora, very talented, with the right environment, quite a lot of them willing, I mean, people like me who are willing to come back and contribute in Africa. So I think this needs to be, because I think what we're talking about here is maybe the existing public sector capacity or private sector capacity in Africa, but I think we should look at the diaspora also as a source of talent for the transformation of Africa.
Okay, let me say something about the implementation from the youth perspective. Well, like we 70% of the African the youth, and for the sake of all government youth on the starting from the formulation, consultation, then on the implementation. It has to be all inclusive, because as a create more jobs for the youth to formulate and to create more jobs and continent. We have to have the input from the youth, and the implementation also should include the youth as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been quite interesting. I was going to try and pick up some few pointers on what is coming out, but time is not on our side. At this point, I want to request Professor Nandozi to just share with us the final words and also provide the vote of thanks so that we can round up this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted, first of all, to very quickly say something about two important things that Attorney Ligatu mentioned, which are very important in terms of the public sector. It's a big headache on the continent, and I mentioned it before. The quality is lacking in many countries, but if you ask the governments, many of them are interested in elevating the quality of the public sector and pay attention to retention issues through appropriate compensation. Usually that's what it is, because so that your best and brightest, when they graduate, they're proud to go in there. But they have a dilemma. One is, for you to do that and still maintain a budget that is acceptable, then you have to reduce the size significantly and pay fewer people higher salaries. And then that creates another issue of unemployment and people who are going to be laid off. So they say it's a big challenge. Secondly, a lot of politics is involved in there. Many countries use this to, as a patronage mechanism to people in their party and have them in there. So when you mention it, it's a very sensitive area because they won't even touch it, But we are working hard on that, to make sure, because we know that's a very big, challenge. The diaspora, if you look at our, the work that we have already done on Agenda 2063, you see that there's a huge emphasis on, mobilizing the diaspora intellectual and financial capacity as human capacity as well to fill a lot of the gaps that we already have, but also to help in implementation. One thing that is coming out here is that a lot of work needs to be done. Heavy lifting is involved, and that it's not going to be a one-off deal. That we have to really continue the training that needs to take place, the sensitization that needs to take place, the mobilization that needs to take place, and the advocacy that needs to take place at various levels, national, sub-regional, and continental. And that is not going to happen overnight. And I am really happy that we have a very dynamic commissioner here who has been championing this. Commissioner, one thing that I request of you is that we have to find a way to maintain coherence and better coordination of efforts, because often you see good intentions that will create all kinds of wasteful duplication of efforts, or that will even create higher transaction costs on the beneficiaries, managing all these people, because everybody and their mother will start jumping in now to say, we're going to come and help you to do this and that. So if it is possible to see a way of getting all the important players together, so that some sort of division of labor can be clarified. Some people will lead certain dimensions and others will follow in other dimensions. This will help us to really pull our resources together, build better synergies, and maximize the impact on the ground. Bon, encore une fois, je vous remercie pour, n'est-ce pas, de la participation dans cette séance.
Side event. We wanted to have additional time, but bearing in mind that we were only given 1 hour, we even went beyond the time that was allocated for us. In any case, it was a very enriching discussion. I have learned a lot from our discussions, and I hope that you also learned from it. Without further ado, I just wanted to thank all the panelists who took their time to support us, and we will continue our discussion. I promise you that. And once again, thank you very much and have a very good evening.